Hello, 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 y'all. I am fortunate enough to be here today with Sun. I'm not going to steal his thunder, as always. Sun, who are you and what are you doing here today?
Hi Ryan, thanks so much for having me. So my name is Sun. I'm a agency owner, and I also have a learning community where I teach storytelling as well. And so yeah, I started my career as a freelancer, which eventually turned into a digital agency where we started working with a lot of Fortune 500 companies in the beginning, but eventually I kind of fell in love with personal branding. A lot of our clients kind of shift over the years from corporate to people like authors, public speakers, and things like that. And I kind of like really enjoy working with people and helping people build personal brands. So we switched our niche to there. And for I would say about the last 4 years, I've been trying to get my own personal brand off the ground. I'm kind of going all in on personal brands these days because I really feel like personal brand is kind of like the future of brands and where it's at.
That is super interesting. What trends and kind of patterns have you noticed going from corporate marketing and in corporate digital agency work to this trend of personal branding being kind of where the puck is going, so to speak?
I think I noticed it like in the last 10 years because of social media. Like one of the most obvious place where I noticed was on Shark Tank, because what I noticed is like people would go on there and they would like pitch their business, and even if they don't get funding right then and there or something like that, if the investor has an interest, like I just found out how valuable, like for example, Kevin O'Leary is as an investor, not just as a for the money, but his personal brand, right?
Right.
And then around the same time, I heard like about 5 years ago, I heard Will Smith was starting a YouTube channel, and I'm like this guy's already famous. Why is he starting a YouTube channel? Like starting from 100K subscriber, like why, right? And then I see people like Ray Dalio writing a book. I see like the chairman of Disney writing a book, and so we started getting all these ex CEO clients, like the CEO of Netflix, who like now wanted to write a book and spread his word, and I'm like, what is going on, right? And I think around the same time I started noticing that with like Richard Branson, Elon Musk, and then I also around the same time I think Kylie Jenner just became a billionaire. She was like on the cover of Forbes magazine for being like the youngest billionaire overnight. So that like all of those things with Mr. Beast and all those things like made me realize I'm like, okay, I think there's something here. I think there's in the future, like you can start a brand and be an overnight success right away as long as you have a personal brand that people trust, right? And I also noticed at that time, I'm like, okay, I see all these billionaires because like around that same time also I started seeing that like all these Silicon Valley investors wanted to buy Mr. Beast YouTube channel.
Hmm.
So like all of those kind of acquisitions were happening, and also at the same time I saw that a lot of these I don't know if you heard with like what happened with FTX and like
Sure.
other company, right? The one that where you draw blood, like
That
yeah,
right.
yeah. And I think there were a few like YouTube sponsors who, like one of them is called Establishment Titles. There were a few YouTube sponsors where these companies weren't really legit. It was a
Hmm.
little bit shady, but they got all these famous people to endorse them, right? Like to do sponsorships for them. So in exchange for money. But then like after FTX and all these stuff started coming out, what I noticed is a lot of the influencers that I was working with, they were a little bit afraid of ruining their name because they're basically backing on a different product, right? They have no control. I have no control over FTX. I'm backing it and I'm endorsing it, but they can go they can go fuck up and there's nothing I can do, right? So because of that, I think like brands are starting their own product line rather than just partner like in the old days. Like now Mr. Beast will just start, Beastable instead of like partnering partnering with Hershey's, or like Dwayne Johnson would just start his own tequila company rather than, partner up with a tequila company. So like all of these things I notice, and I'm like, okay, I can clearly see where this is going in the future. And that's why, like, every time I meet anyone, I always say, build a personal brand.
Yeah.
There's going to be nothing more valuable. Nothing will have better return on investment than investing into your personal brand.
You mentioned it's super interesting how you mentioned this, because I've never heard an answer to this question, but you mentioned how Mr. Beast had a few people try to purchase his YouTube channel. Can a personal brand be acquisitioned, or like how do you? Is it because it's not?
Yeah, I don't know. That's I'm sure all of those answers will start to come out now, right? Because it wasn't really like a big thing before. Because before, people would buy a brand that, let's say, has like a face of a brand, right? Like Steve Jobs, Richard Branson. But it wasn't really a matter, because they'll stay on for a few years and then eventually they'll transition out of the company. And like Walt Disney, I guess, still is the face of Disney, but those are very rare cases, right? Like, it's not really, you don't really see one brand where the personal brand was all, like, was everything, like Mr. Beast.
Right.
Where then what happens when Mr. Beast steps out, right? And how long is that period happen? And within that, like, so all of those things I'm sure we'll figure out an answer to it. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm assuming it's kind of like a TV channel, right? When you have like a news channel and then the reporter goes somewhere else, the anchor goes somewhere else, the channel still remains. It'll probably not be the same anymore, but
it's kind of seeing where these patterns are going. And I was at a Tony Robbins Business Mastery event, and he was talking about AI and how he had been working with a few AI, I guess, people. I don't know if that's a way to say AI people, but to basically take all of the data sets and recordings that he's had over, decades, and make a large language model version of himself. Kind of holographic large language models, like where you could just make an AI.
Like Tony Robbins bot or something.
Right,
like
exactly. Now that is his personal brand, and then someone owns the rights to it. Like, I think Morgan Freeman's voice people own, or like he licenses access to it, or whatever.
Oh yeah, I heard that too. Yeah.
What do you see?
I don't know if that's so good yet, because I've seen some of those like AI bots, like where you dump all your data into it and it asks you a bunch of questions, and people do that, and then now there's a spot where I can ask a question and this bot will answer it as if Tony Robbins would answer it, right? But from what I've seen, it hasn't been that good. Like, it doesn't, because a couple of my friends have done it. But then when I ask question and I see the answers, like, it's clear that, right, it's not there yet, because they'll be like, oh, that's not how I would answer that. You know what I mean?
And so,
but I can see how it'll get there.
Yeah, with time, right? And tech moving exponentially these days. So you've been working in this personal branding niche of marketing, which I guess is no longer a small niche, because it's pretty much standard.
Yeah, it's big now.
Who are some of the clients you're working with today? And then what is, let's say, the main thing that you've learned from working with those clients?
So the clients that we work with are people like Marc Randolph, who's the founder of Netflix, Shetty, who's like a motivational speaker, Gabby Bernstein, Mel Robbins. So most people, mostly in the personal development kind of self-help space. And I also I help like smaller brands as well. I'm actually trying to step away from like doing it from the agency side. And I really want to make a bigger impact. So I'm trying to teach people how to build their personal brand like on a bigger scale. But yeah, I guess what I see when I work with clients is, like, I didn't realize this before, but how important the authenticity is, like, of your personality, because essentially that's what's happening, right? When somebody is buying Tony Robbins bot, right? Let's say I'm licensing Tony Robbins bot on my website or something like that, or I'm licensing his personal brand in order to sell something. the reason why I'm able to do that, the reason why that brand is valuable is because he's built trust with his audience, right? And his audience trusts him. So for example, right now, if I were to go be like, hey, should I invest into AI? Should I, spend time and money learning AI, right? Tony Robbins might give you one answer. And then, Gary Vee might give you another answer. Like
Right.
different people might give you a different answer, right? And the way I see that is because, okay, when I hear an answer from these people, I can kind of put it into context. I'm thinking in my head, Tony Robbins is probably saying this because he has this background, blah, blah, blah. This person is saying this. So I can kind of like take their personality into account because we built a relationship online or social media. And that's why I think social media is like the big disruptor. It's the reason why, I heard this story once, 150 years ago, maybe longer. But they said that human brain can only have the capacity to build a relationship with 150 people. Like we're just not able to build a relationship with more than 150 people. Like our brain capability is not there. And when I say build a relationship, I mean when you go into a restaurant and that person is there, they'll ask you to join them in their table. Like that's the level of a relationship I'm talking about. Like that or up, right?
Okay.
And you can only have about 150 of those in your life.
Okay.
Right? That's kind of how our brains are wired. And the reason why is because we used to live in these towns where the population was about 150 and people die off or whatever. And we just knew everybody in the town. We knew the doctor in the town. We knew the priest. We knew the carpenter. we knew the cobbler. So because we know everybody, everything is based on that trust. Oh, I know I can trust this wise old man. Oh, I know I can trust this librarian to do this for their knowledge or whatever it is, right? But what ended up happening is as modern society evolved and we started moving into the cities, we had to constantly prove ourselves. Like now I have to, before, if I'm 30 years old living in this town, 150 people already know me. I don't have to prove myself constantly. They already know how smart I am. They know how talented I am. They know if I'm a liar. My reputation has already been set, right? But now we live in cities with 1 million people, and now we go into a job interview, and in a matter of an hour, I have to prove myself to this company to hire me, right? I might go on a Tinder date, and within a certain number of minutes, I have to prove myself to this person. And so I think this value of selling yourself, marketing yourself, or, like job interviews and just being personable has become a valuable talent over the last 100, 200 years because of that, because we're living more and more. So people that are really good at that, they move up. You're not as good at that, it's harder to move up, right? But the downside there is, in a town of 150 people, even if you're not constantly selling yourself or anything like that, people still know you. But within a town of 1 million people, unless you're constantly selling yourself, nobody knows who you are, right? But I think social media has changed that. Now with social media, I can put out content every day. I can have conversations with millions of people to a point where I can prove my knowledge. I can prove my worth. I can prove my value and trust to millions of people at once without me having to build a relationship one-on-one. And I think that's like the thing that is changing the game. Now I can see a 20-year-old guy talking about some video game online, and I can trust that person is the expert. He knows what he's talking about over some kid that I've never seen before or something like that. And that's what a personal brand is. It's just your reputation, your trust factor at scale.
And this kind of opportunity that you're having after realizing this of, for the big corporate head honchos out there that they realize this too, what advice do you have for that person that they're already, they're kicking ass in their corporate life and they're realizing, okay, I got to kind of build out this personal brand. What advice do you have for that person in that situation?
Yeah. So it's funny because, first of all, a lot of people that come to me are people like that. So there's this weird weird thing going on right now where people come to me, like the younger people in their 20s and maybe early 30s. They'll come to me and they say, "Son, how do I build how do I build my social media, or how do I build my business or my product or something like that?" Right. So there's definitely a big chunk of people that ask me those questions. But on the flip side, this is the part that I don't think a lot of people know. There's also a lot of people in their 30s and 40s, maybe 50s, who are a little bit older, who already has experience. So they've already built a business. They already have some knowledge and they have experience. They just don't know how to build their personal brand. They don't know how social media works and things like that. So now they're trying to also do that. So, and those people, I actually think, they have a lot to prove. They're just too shy to put their stuff out there. But at the end of the day, they have experience. They've lived life. So they have knowledge and experience that they can share, right? So to those people, what I will always say is, like, just don't be afraid to share those things, because that's going to be the game. Like at the end of the day, right now, the one who knows the most is not the one who's going to win. The one who knows the most knowledge is not the one who wins. The one where the people knows you the most, those are the people who are going to win. So that's why you need to go out there. So what I would say is, number one, just keep putting out. It's never too late to put out content, right? So in whatever place you are right now, just start putting out content. And you might not know exactly what that looks like right now, but if you just put out random content for like a year, it'll draw a picture of where you're supposed to go. It's hard to know when you're just starting out what kind of content you should make.
And so for you, kind of going through this journey, obviously the way you and I got connected was through Monique, the TEDx the organizer. How did you make the decision to give a TEDx talk when you'd made that decision to do that? Like, what did that decision look like for you?
I didn't go in thinking that I'm going to do a TEDx talk. Like I did one thing at a time. So in the beginning, I was like, I need to build a personal brand. So what I did was, in the old days, I would spend all this time I invest into making YouTube videos, and it'll get like 8 views, right? So that I knew that wasn't working out. It was like way too much investment in time and money for return. So I stopped that for a while, and then about 3 years ago, what I did was I just took some of my Zoom recording clips, like if I do a recording like this, Zoom clips, and started putting them on Instagram, posting on quotes and these carousels on Instagram. So that's what I started doing. And some of those started like kind of doing, like people started liking them. That's how it grew. Once I got my social media to a certain place, like for like a year and a half, I just kept making content. Once I got my social media content to a certain place, then I'm like, okay, I think I want to do speaking now. So what I did was I just literally reached out to, like, that's one thing you can do, right? You can say TEDx, apply to speak, or something like that. Like every TEDx organizer has their own page where you can apply to become a speaker, right? I mean, that's like the lowest thing. Like, I don't know why everyone's not doing that. Like, it's one of those things where like somebody's like, son, I need clients, or I need a job. And I say, hey, like, have you been applying? And they're like, yeah, I applied up to a couple last week. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, dude, when I was looking for a job, I was applying to 50 jobs a day. Like, I didn't even care what they were, right? So I just feel like when people are ready, like let's say you're ready to make content, you're ready to go put yourself out there and things like that, it doesn't happen like that where I'm ready, so now I'm going to come up with a grand plan to do this. Like, that's not usually how it works. For me, how it usually works is, once I'm ready, then I just do whatever the most messiest way that is possible to just get that thing started, right? So my version of this, when I was ready, was to just Google TEDx, apply to speak, and just like fill out those forms, like hundreds of them, right? And of course, 99% of them are going to say no. But there is going to be that one person who says yes, right?
Yep.
And I also did like apply to speak like I will Google like conference plus apply or speaker or something like that. So then you get a result of all these like Google search results with like all these conferences and events, and most of them have like a little section that says apply to speak at this event or something like that. So just started applying to all of them, and you really be surprised just by doing that. I mean, that sounds like a boring, just manual labor, right? But you really be surprised if you do that every day for like a few months. Like you'll get more than enough speaking gigs just by doing that.
I
But for
know.
me, what came before that was content first. So I would actually recommend doing that simultaneously because they help each other, right? Like if I apply to a speaking gig, the first thing they're gonna go is they're gonna go to my Instagram or YouTube and look at my content, right? So I want to make sure there's something there, so people can kind of get a sense for what I'm about and all of that. So like, put out some content first, and then, yeah.
And I know when you're building your personal brand on socials, I say that word socials, and then the question I have is about that. How do you help these clients you work with decide the socials that they give the most effort to, or do you just say, hey, post it here, and this software, I think Hootsuite or whatever it is, will cross-pollinate it across everything? Or how do you guys kind of strategically go about choosing your main platform?
Depends on where they are, but if I would say if they're brand new, they've never actually done social media before, I usually tell them to pick their favorite platform and just post and use that platform first, even if it's for like 5-6 months. And the reason why is because, you know, there's social media consumers, and then there's social media creators, and then people who do both, right? But most of them are not people who do both. There's usually creators, and then there's consumers. Most of them are not both, okay? And what I notice is that there's like two very different mindset mentality, right? So on one end, I see people that are like creators. So I'm like, okay, go post on Instagram and Facebook and blah, blah, blah. So they'll like create this factory and they'll make all this posts and they'll post it. But that's all they do. They just keep posting it and they don't actually engage with it. They don't go in and check their DMs or anything like that, right? So what I noticed is those people are posting and ghosting, and that's not going to work, right? If you just treat it as like a blog where you just post it and you don't engage with anyone, you don't comment, you don't use it, you don't actually use the platform, then it's not going to work, because I think half of social media is social. So for me, like if all I did was post content and didn't do anything else, like I wouldn't really get much out of it, because where I get my opportunities from is after I post. Now I would reach out to somebody and I would say, hey, you know, like I would love to invite you to come to my podcast or something like that, right? Or I would invite somebody, be like, hey, I saw that you guys are having an event next March. Do you need any speakers? And then just reaching out to them by DM, right? So that's a social aspect of it. And that whole side, some people are just missing altogether, I noticed. So that's one of the things that I always tell our students, is that when you go on social media, yes, there's the content side, but don't forget about the engagement side, because that's where you're going to network. You're going to build relationship. You're going to reach out to, you're going to cold DM people. You're going to reply to comments. You're going to share their content, right? So that they start noticing you and start getting on their radar. Because once you're on somebody's radar and they start sharing your content, now everyone who's following that person, you'll get on their radar.
Yeah.
And then you network with them and then you get on their radar. And this is that's the social aspect of it. I personally think that's so important. So that's why I always say is, if you haven't used social media before, just pick your favorite one. If you like Instagram is your favorite, then just use Instagram as a regular Instagram user every day. If TikTok is the one, then use everyday TikTok like how you would use it. Because all these platforms, once you use it for a couple months, you start to notice like little trends on there and things that people do, like how they comment, right? Or how do they reply to comment with a video, or how do they use stickers? Like there are these trends that are happening in these apps that you don't know about from an outsider point of view. But once you start using it every day for like 3 months, you'll start to catch that. And once you understand how the trends on Instagram or trends on TikTok, on YouTube Shorts or whatever it is, then you can start to utilize the trends. And you can then now, because you're a user of that app, now you know how to create content in a way that it'll be more engaging, people will like. But it's really, really, really like I don't know how to explain that. It's really hard to make a content for platforms that you have not used yourself. Like it's not like, oh, you have a 30-second reel that you can just post to TikTok and YouTube Shorts and they'll perform the same. No, it's not. Because like on TikTok, there are certain things that people are looking for. On Instagram, there are certain things that people are looking for, you know?
Right. And then for you, you did the TED Talk, you really mastered socials. I'm looking at your shirt.
Mm-hmm.
I have a strong suspicion you've got a podcast as well.
Yeah.
How did you go about making that decision to decide to start a podcast? And then how did you go about growing that podcast and then leveraging it among your socials, your personal brand, and for your clients, even if that's what you do as well?
Yeah, so this is something that I would recommend to a lot of people, because the reason why I got started on podcasts was because even in the beginning, how I made video content was I would, let's say, jump on a Zoom call with one of my employees, right? And I'll be giving them advice. Or I'll be on the call with my client and I'll be explaining something about websites to them. And then I'll take a little clip from there, that Zoom call, and I'll post it, right? So I'm like, oh, I'm already doing this. So about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I started a podcast so that I can constantly have long form content. And then I can just take clips from that, right? So if you do enjoy talking, and if you have a lot of knowledge around an area of expertise, what I would highly, highly, highly recommend you do, especially if you have knowledge, because what happens is if you meet let's say a mechanic who's like has 30 years of experience and super knowledgeable versus like a mechanic who's been only doing it for a year, like just at a quick glance, you can't really tell who's like knowledgeable or not. There's no way for you to tell, right? But if each one of them had sat down with another mechanic and had an hour-long conversation each, after that hour-long conversation, it's pretty clear who's more knowledgeable and who's not, right? And I think in content this happens a lot too, where I'll tell somebody to be like, just start putting out content, just start talking about, like for you, let's say, I would say start talking about public speaking or how to apply to, just start talking about that. And a lot of times people can't. They're like, yeah, but when I start trying to make content, I'm like, oh, everyone already knows this. Or like, oh, why would anybody care about this? This is like, like it feels cliche or whatever. But then when they go on a coaching call, or like they'll go in like a consultation call, and they have so much to say, like when they're in a conversation. And that's because it's so hard to make content, to speak to a blank audience. Let's say I have 1,000 people audience that I'm talking to, and I don't know who they are. I'm just speaking into the void, right? Like into the green dot, the camera or whatever. It's really, really hard because you don't know what to say. You get into this like brain blocks. You're like, oh, would people care about this? Why would anybody? Like you get into this zone. So one of the things that I tell people when you're public speaking on stage is don't speak to the audience, speak to the individuals. So like I'll literally look at somebody who's paying attention and I'll talk to that person individually for like 10 seconds. And then I'll move on to the next person who's also paying attention. I'll talk to that person. So if you're like speaking to individuals 10 seconds at a time, that actually becomes a lot more engaging of a talk. So, and I do that on social media too. So on social media, what I'm doing is somebody will DM me and say, son, like I really like what you said the other day about this, but I don't have any money. So how should I get started? Well, now I have a specific question from a specific person with a specific question about something I said, right? So now I'm going to answer that person publicly. So I'm going to take out my phone I'm gonna be like, okay, somebody just asked me this question. Like this person said, I told them that they shouldn't start a business unless they have a business, and they said, what should I do? I don't have money right now. So how should I get started? And this is what I would recommend. Like, if you don't have money right now, do blah. Instead of starting a business, just move into a smaller house, go get a higher paying job, go get a second job, and save your money for the next 6 months, whatever it is. I'll answer that one specific person, right? But then because I'm posting it, now everyone else sees it. And everyone else who sees that is also going to be like, oh, that also applies to me. I'm glad that this person asked that question or something like that, right?
Mm.
So it's always like you're speaking to one person at a time, but you're scaling that. And that's how I would treat social media. So I would recommend people, if you have a vast knowledge in, let's say, in one area, whether it's technology, video gaming, or whatever it is, start a podcast. It's so easy to start a podcast nowadays with all the softwares out there. Invite some guests, whether it's clients, friends, or whatever it is, and just have a conversation with that person, like deep conversation about that one area of expertise, that topic. And what will happen is that conversation will be so filled with knowledge that you can probably take like 20 clips from that conversation and turn it into content. And that I really think is like the easiest, best way to make content if you are an expert in one area.
Mm. And so I noticed another thing that speakers have that I think you do really well is they have a community. So you have your podcast, you have your socials, you also have your community. It's Night Owls community is what it's called,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that, kind of how you decided to start building your community and kind of how do you grow that? How do you manage that? What does that kind of look like on the back end?
Yeah, so we have membership site. It's our community. It's called Night Owl Nation, and it's $30 a month. And so we get together every week. So we have like live sessions, and we also have small groups where people just meet on their own. And our whole goal is for me to teach every week, and then for them to practice. So every week I give them assignment. Like this week, I want you to write about your weaknesses or strengths. So every week I'm giving like these writing assignments where they have to come up with a story or something like that, and they're practicing storytelling. They're telling it to other people in the group. So that's our community. So I personally think that that's kind of like the model that we're going to see a lot of, where people grow their social media, they grow an audience, and from there they bring him to, let's say, the next. So once you have people on social media, right? That's just step one. Let's say you tweet, you go on LinkedIn, and these people are following you there. Most of these people are following you, but they're not like on your mailing list, for example. So most of them are only going to see like 1 out of 10 pieces of content that you put out, right? Like if you have 100,000 followers, let's say, that doesn't mean 100,000 people are seeing your content. Like we have to remember that, right? So let's say you have 1,000 followers, and let's say 200 people saw your content, and out of there, let's say 30 people liked it, right? That means, like 800 people, like 80% of people didn't even see it. And that's why social media is just at the lowest level. And then one day, if you put out like a really awesome content that triggers algorithm, then more people will see it or something like that. But that's at the lowest level. From there, what you need to do is, out of that group of people, there's 10% of those people who are like actually your true fans that actually love your content. So now you got to get those people in the next level, which is like your mailing list, right? And then on a weekly basis, you're sending them more longer format email, or you're sending them to your podcast. So on the bottom is like the short form content, the 30-second, 10-second, 30-second, 60-second clips. And then one level up is email newsletter, podcast, interviews, like the longer format. And this is where you're gaining more of their credibility, more authority from those people. And then finally, like from there, you want to move them up to some sort of a paid subscription or some sort of a paid product, right? Because the people who are paying you are your true customers, like true fans. So I think that's kind of how we do it. And I think that's going to be like a pretty popular model for most people.
Very good to know.
And the funny thing is, when you build a community, you shouldn't be worried too much about numbers. Because I see people think like that. Okay, I need 1,000 people in my community, so this is how I scale it, blah blah blah, and this is like. But don't think about automation. Don't think about scaling. Don't think about any of that right now. Like for your first 100 members, think about like building relationship with your first 100 members individually. You should literally know the name, the location, and like you should personally know your first 100 members is what I'm trying to say, right? Because people try to scale it. Okay, they put up a sign-up page, blah blah blah, and they don't even know who their members are, and then they're like complaining about that it's not growing. But the thing is, I guarantee you, if you know the first names and if you personally know the first 100 members of your community, I guarantee you, going from 100 to 1,000 is not going to be a problem, because these things spread. These things spread like that. So what ends up happening is when you're on a one-on-one level, building relationship with individuals, they go out and they talk, and they start talking about you behind your back, and then that's how the community grows. And those are the stuff that you don't really see. That's why there's a huge difference between just putting out content and then just like ignoring it, versus putting out content and actually building a relationship one-on-one with your community members.
And then from a more tactical perspective, is there a software that you use to kind of manage the community and manage the subscriptions on the back end? ClickFunnels, Circle, something like that?
Yeah, we use Circle for everything. So once you're a member, all of the communication goes through Circle. I have somebody who kind of manages like the communication at the high level. So if there's announcements, people like support tickets and things like that, somebody who's doing that. But other than that, like people will DM me, I'll reply to them. Like I know like so in our community we have like our paid members, but we also have what's called small group leaders, which is like who's been with us the longest. So I know like I'm replying to my small group leaders first, obviously. So I have a little group chat called small group leaders, and then after that the members, and then so on. So I have like a hierarchy of like the people I should reply to first, you know. But it's really not rocket science. I really think that it's a mindset shift.
Yeah.
I think once we're ready to open ourselves up to a human experience, like we don't think of them as these are our members, blah 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 blah. But like literally treat them like your friends, like they are your friends. They're your best friends.
Yeah.
And if you treat them like that, the community will grow.
I'm super curious to see what you'll say to this next question. So you're paying attention to a lot of content creators and that kind of thing. You're familiar with Alex Hormozy.
Yeah.
How do you analyze what he's doing, and how do you kind of pick it apart and see, okay, he's doing this great, he could improve here. If you're trying to do something like that, you should do this. How do you analyze that? Because you have so much experience, you're kind of seeing it through so many filters, you're seeing it on a finite level. How do you analyze what he's doing?
What I would say is, okay, so one thing that I see him doing things differently than other people is I feel like most people are trying to monetize way too early. Whereas I see him investing into his brand first, right? And then monetizing later, right? Like selling his books or whatever it is. And he's giving away all his courses for free. So one thing I would definitely say what he's doing is very fresh, right? Because like people are not doing what he's actually backing up what he's saying, right? He's giving like the courses that he's giving away for like this lead generation and running ads and things like that. I've seen a lot of courses before, and I've taken a lot of courses before. And the stuff that he's giving away for free is like just at such a high level. Like those courses should cost way more than like even the ones you see out there, but he's giving them away for free, right? So yeah, one thing I see him doing well is that like he knows how to build a community, deliver value to his audience, earn that trust. So that now the only thing I would advise for people is this is a mistake that I see a lot of people make. They see what Alex Hormozi is doing, they see what Gary Vee is doing, and they see what Tony Robbins is doing, and they try to replicate that model. And that's like the biggest mistake you can make, because the only reason why Alex Hormozi is able to do that is because he has that skill. It's like, it's one thing if I have 1 million people in my mailing list and I have $3 million to spend on advertising and expenses, and I'm trying to get a return of $6 million in book sales or whatever. Like, that's a very different thing than if my budget is $5,000 a month and I want to sell a course that makes this much month every. Like, it's the two are very different in scale. So what's going to work for him is not necessarily going to work for you. What's going to work for you is not necessarily going to work for them. So we need to be very wary of that. Is that what Alex Hormozi is doing only works because right now he has the scale. He's already gotten his skill there, right? If he started with that 4 years ago, it wouldn't have worked. Do you know what I mean? Like, so a lot of times what we need to do is we need to look at other people who are succeeding at the same level that we're succeeding, try to replicate that model, and then once we get to a certain scale, then try to replicate that model, and so on and so on.
He was saying in one of his pieces of content that he kind of filters his opportunities right now with, is this worth $1 billion or not? He gets offered affiliate partnerships. Oh, pay $60K. That's a no, right? So I want to ask you the question: at your level, what kind of filter do you use to determine if you say yes or no to certain opportunities with where you're at now?
Yeah, I'm sure Alex also has other methods other than just that. But for me, I look at so when we get a project, I used to look at it like, oh, this is going to help us with our brand. It's going to help us put our name out there, but it's also going to make this much in profit and all of that, right? What I realized is that from an agency point of view, that was all wrong. Actually, like in a lot of different businesses, this is all wrong. There are projects and partnerships or collaboration that you'll have that's going to bring you opportunities. And then there's projects and collaboration that's going to bring you money. And most of the times, not always, but most of the times, they're not usually the same opportunity. So I realized that like in the first 10 years of my business, right? Whenever we got a new big project and we try to win an award with this, and then we also try to make it profitable, it just never worked. So now when we get a project, we have to ask ourselves, seriously, are we doing this for money? Or are we doing this for our portfolio or for our brand, right? So I'll give you an example. Like sometimes we'll get a big brand come to us and they'll say, oh, we don't have a big budget. We only have a budget of this much. And they ask me if we want it or not. Now we need to go back and say, okay, is this project going to help us put us on the map by winning awards, like putting our name out there, like it's going to help us in the future? Or is it going to make us profit right now, right? Obviously, we know that it's not going to make us profit right now because they said their budget is low, right? So now we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to take this on for this or not? Just for our reputation in the future or not? So now I have to make the decision. I have to say, yes, it's worth it or it's not worth it. And sometimes we take it and sometimes we don't. But that's what I realized is that there are some projects that we get that we made zero money from, or we actually lost a lot of money from. But it ended up exponentially growing our business in the future because of the name.
Sure.
Right? And then there are certain projects where they paid us $500,000 for a small project. But it really didn't help the company at all in the long run, right? Except for pay our bills, right? So I think there's that kind of aspect to it there, where I'm sure there are some people that come to him that are like, it's a good relationship, and there are probably most businesses that come to him is probably like high risk type of business. Yeah.
Well, I know we're running short on time here. Last question I have for you, it's kind of a double question, if that counts. What advice or important information do you have for the aspiring speaker, the professional speaker, or the business owner that speaks as a function of their business to grow their business? If there's one thing that's most relevant for them to know from your experience right now, what would you say that is? And then let's say I find that so valuable. I want to find you on the internet. Where can I find you?
I'll say two things because I think these two things are the things that I see a lot of people struggle with. So one of them is, I think it has to do with confidence. So I think everybody needs to understand that they can be they can build that confidence on stage, right? Because everyone's scared of public speaking.
Yeah.
Like they ask people like what they're afraid of, and like I think the thing that they were more afraid of than death was public speaking. So I think to get over that, I think one of the things that needs to happen is we need to exercise our mind to understand that, you know, like I remember when I was young, there was this like really big dork in our school who was like definitely not a cool kid. But then when I saw him at his house, that he was having some get together with his friends, they were all like gamers. Like he was like the coolest kid there, right? So obviously, like his level of confidence when he's in school versus when he's at this party where he's like the cool kid is different, right? Like, and we've been there before, where, you know, when we're talking about something that we know a lot about, we're confident, but then when we're at, you know, at some school dance, now we're shy, something like that, right? So confidence is like contextual. So I think what we need to do is we need to find out those areas where we are already confident in, because we know a lot about it, and start from there. Start talking about that stuff, right? And build our and then we need to expand that so that we become comfortable speaking on stage and things like that. And that's kind of what happened to me over time. In the beginning, you know, you hear your own voice and you're like all cringed out, but after a while you start to build that confidence and you start to say, okay, yeah, I am worth, you know, speaking these things, right? So we have to get over that first. Second thing I would say is, this is not just for public speaking, but just entrepreneurship in general, is the key to success in entrepreneurship or building social media, whatever it is, brands, is not about like it's not about like the cool things that you do, but it's actually about the boring things that you do that people don't see. And that's where I think a lot of people fail, because, you know, we might look at somebody who made it big and we'll be like, oh, this person had this opportunity and this opportunity and this opportunity, and that's why they became successful. Well, the truth is, if you look at most of these people, even without those three things, they would have still became successful. And the reason why is because they've been putting in the boring work every single day for years, right? Which is what led to those opportunities or something like that. So that's what I would say. Like by the time when you actually get to, when you're like traveling around the world speaking from stage to stage and, you know, like doing these things and, or, you know, getting invited to talk somewhere, after a while it gets boring. It's like no matter what you think, no matter how fun or exciting you think something is, how passionate you are about something, at some point that thing will get boring if you focused on that thing. So what I usually tell people is, when you're speaking, when you're making content and things like that, don't focus on the subject matter. For example, like I talk about storytelling and content marketing and things like that. But if all of my focus was on the topic, right, storytelling, talking, content marketing, and things like that, I would get bored really easily at some point, because I'm going to be like, I already said this 100 times. I already talked about this 100 times. Blah, blah, blah. But then if you put your attention on the audience, like who you're helping, then it can get exciting. Like right now, if I walk up in the morning and I have to open my Instagram stories and say, hey, everyone, like I wanted to share this with you, blah, blah, blah. Like I will never get myself to do it. Why? Because I've already said that thing 100 times. So where's the motivation for me to do it, right? But if I open up that app and I check my DM, and I see in my DM like Ryan, and Ryan's like, son, I've been struggling with this, and I can, and you ask me a specific question, that's gonna hype me up, and they're gonna like, oh yeah, I gotta help this guy Ryan, and I need to answer him. So I record a video, and even though it was the same thing I was gonna say, because I know it's going to you, I know it's going to an actual human being who this is gonna help. It comes from a completely different place. So that's like the most important thing I would say is don't focus on the what, focus on who you're serving with the what. You know what I mean?
Oh
Because
yeah.
then you'll outlast the game. If you just focus on the what gets boring after years, no matter how exciting it is.
Boom. So, son, where can I find you? I'm getting so much value from what you're saying. Where can I find you on the internet right now?
So the best place will be my Instagram. Like my website, everything is already on there. So just go to Instagram. My handle is sun.yi. So sun.yi.
Beauty. All right, son. Well, thank you. I will wrap up the recording here. And thank you guys for listening. Hopefully you found this just as valuable as I have. Cheers, y'all.